All right, welcome to our second installment of the Hermitage as Spiritual Practice webinar series. In our second annual Father Charles Brandt Memorial Lecture Series, February 19th is Father Charles Brandt's birthday, and we like to honor him by having a conversation about contemplation and ecology, or contemplative ecology, as I like to say. And we're just absolutely thrilled to have folks here for this second conversation. Tonight I'm joined by Kathi Bentall, who is a co-founder of the Rivendell Hermitage. Hopefully we'll get to hear from folks whose lives have been blessed by that place, and I am certainly one of them. I'm deeply grateful for the Rivendell Hermitage, as you'll see. But just in case you're unfamiliar with Father Charles Brandt, I just wanted to say very quickly a word about him. In the first lecture series, I gave a kind of a more formal introduction. But for those of you who aren't familiar, Father Charles Brandt was a hermit priest who lived in Black Creek, British Columbia, which is on Vancouver Island, north of Nanaimo. And he had about 30 acres there and a hermitage on the Oyster River. And he lived as a priest and as a hermit. He made his living as a bookbinder and conservationist of rare texts. He was for much of his life, he was an avid fly fisherman and conservationist, and had a lot to do with the restoration of the Solom and the Oyster Rivers. And I met Father Charles Brandt in about 2017, and when I was doing my doctoral dissertation on contemplative communities and the land, and I interviewed him, and we talked about Thomas Berry and about spirituality, about Thomas Merton, and he made a deep impression on me. And so when I heard that George Wall and Bruce Witzel and Willa Cannon had founded a Hermitage Society, I asked to join, and then they asked me to join the board. And then since then it was all fated to be as it is. We have a wonderful board now. Bev, maybe give a wave. Hi, Bev. Bev's on the board, and Anne Arsenault down below with her camera off is also on the board. George Wall's a former board member. Bruce Witzel, also a former board member. Karen Nickel has done a ton of work for the Hermitage and the archive, and is a former resident of the Hermitage. So, and Arlene as well is here. Mike and Arlene have a very strong connection to the Hermitage. And so there's, some of us who go way back with Charles, and maybe others of us who are hearing about him for the first time. If you're interested, you can check out our website, charlesbrandt.ca, charlesbrandt.ca. I'll put that in the chat. We have a contemplative in residence program if you're looking for an extended period of solitude. We're also involved with semi-regular meditations at the Hermitage, but are also involved. George has some connections in the Comox Valley area, if you live there, for in-person meditation groups that are happening there. And of course, we curate and preserve the Hermitage that Charles left, and his archive, his library, and are doing our best to promote his vision for a more contemplative ecology. And with that, I really am so grateful for Kathi being here. When I put out feelers about who we should invite to this webinar series, Hermitage as Spiritual Practice, Kathi's name came up immediately. And I've never actually met Kathi in person, even though I've spent so much time at the Hermitage. So it's a real privilege to have you here. And just in terms of bio, I don't want to miss anything, so I'll read this. But Kathi Bentall has led silent retreats for over 25 years and worked extensively in Latin America. She co-founded the Listening Post in Vancouver's downtown Eastside, and helped to create Rivendell Retreat Centre on Bowen Island. Rivendell has 5 sites under its umbrella. One of those is the Hermitage, which was part of Kathy's original vision for a retreat center and was opened in 2015. She is the co-author with Margaret McAvity of Wings of the Wild Birds that came out in 2022, which describes how they led silent retreats and sacred gatherings using emergent design. All right. Welcome, Kathi. I'm going to spotlight you here. Where's that one? Oh, yeah. There we go.
Oh
I,
dear.
I suppose I should do that for myself too, so that because we're in conversation.
That would be helpful.
All right. All right. Well, let's start with origins. Um, what do you say when people ask you where you're from?
I think
Sometimes
as I
that's
get, I think as,
sometimes that's a simple question. Sometimes it's complicated.
I think as you get older, you get asked that much less. But certainly in the last years, I'm very aware that I'm part of the settler population here in Canada, because I have two grandfathers that came over in 1908 from England to settle, one in Vancouver and one on the prairies. But uh, but I grew up myself in Toronto and then in Calgary. But I think a big part of my origin is that my father was well, he actually was born in Vancouver, but he was also Baptist minister, so it was a big part of my childhood in terms of spiritual formation. So that's where I'm from, but I have not lived in Calgary since I was 18. Um, so I'm more of a West Coast person because I love the ocean, but that's my origins. But yeah,
Yeah. And you've never been like a full-time resident on Bowen Island, or is that where you live now?
I am a full-time resident of Bowen
Okay.
now. Yeah, I've lived
Yeah.
here the last 13 years. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think Bowen Island was one of the first places I visited when I moved to Vancouver to do my dissertation, and there's a real beauty and magic to Bowen Island. And
Hmm.
so, and when I Googled retreat centers, that came up. And so it wasn't long, when I moved here in 2013 that I uh, ventured over to the lodge. And I think Sharon actually, I was on a retreat with Sharon, and Sharon took me down to the Hermitage and said, "This is opening soon, and you should check it out." And I was like, "I will."
Oh,
So,
great.
yeah.
Well, I didn't, we used to come out to Howe Sound to Keats Island every summer because
Okay.
my grandfather was very connected with Keats Island and my father too growing up. So I'd never been to Bowen until just before Rivendell sort of came into being. So, but it's very much, I traveled a lot in the world. I would say the most beautiful part of the world is Howe Sound,
Mm,
right there between Bowen
yeah.
and Keats and Gambier. So, yeah.
Uh, yeah, and certainly it's, as you say, important to acknowledge the indigenous stewards of the land, especially when we talk about a contemplative ecology. We're not just talking about, communing with a wild nature, especially around here, right? There's these layers of culture and reconciliation that we have to sit with, all right, as descendants of Europeans. And so we can maybe circle back to that, but it's definitely part of that fabric
Mm.
of the work of a contemplative, as you say, right? To really arrive in a place, we have to acknowledge that, which is what you did first thing.
Can see that I'm having a little bit trouble with my mic, so I'm trying to sit closer. Can you hear now?
Yeah, good. Let's
Everybody
check in
quiet.
on sound quality. Um,
Somebody did a chat there.
yeah. So yeah, Rudy is turned up as much as you can. Other people, Bev, how is Kathy's sound? It's okay. Yeah. So just stay close to the mic there, Kathy,
Okay.
and hopefully it's loud enough for everybody.
I'm just going to add one other thing is when we do our welcome to retreatants that come to Rivendell, Bowen Islands, the Squamish name for Bowen Island is Nuclealicum, and we do acknowledge that there was never any full settlement on Bowen, so they would come and stop off and use it for their fishing, and or harvest cedar and tend this land, walk this land. So we feel like retreat the way we do retreat is also a way of honoring the way that the Squamish people who walked these lands for centuries before us, how they
Yeah,
experienced this island. So yeah.
absolutely. Beautiful and powerful. But yeah, before we, go into the story of Rivendell, let's go to Latin America. Tell us more about the work you've done there, how you got there, or like what was the genesis of that work?
Yeah, I'll try to make this as short as I can because I really do want to get to what the Rivendell story. But what we bring into the creation of these spaces is our own background and our own experiences. And I grew up in the 50s and the 60s, and it was really that very, sort of post-war kind of exciting time and sending out missionaries. And so I was part of that within the Baptist Church, and we went out as missionaries it was in 1975, and went out thinking with these crazy slogans like "We send the best," or just the idea that you're out to help. And our first term there, um, I came back with just questions and really knowing I had very few answers. And it was a very challenging time in Latin America. But then we went back for a second term. And I think that's when my life really started to change. I did a refresher course in Spanish and had the privilege of being at a Maryknoll Institute. And they were very culturally sensitive. There was a round chapel that they had, and they did masses in Quechua and Aymara,
Mm,
and I got to be in a conversational class with a Catholic priest from Peru that was very much involved in liberation theology. So it was a real radicalization of my faith and just really learned so much. And so then when I came back after those 2 years, I did Latin American studies at SFU actually, because we went out woefully unprepared for some of the struggles and the kind of situation we found ourselves in. And so I came back to Canada just not fitting into my church or my culture, um, and ultimately not my marriage either. So it was a very, very challenging time in my life. But
mm,
what I ended up starting to do was working in solidarity with Central American struggles. So ended up going back and forth from Guatemala and learned so much through that experience. I learned about popular education, about trusting group process, and about Christian-based communities, about really looking at reading and doing your own spiritual journey, but listening to very much the context within which people were living. Remember one particular time where we went into a really dark somebody's home, and they were meeting clandestinely in Guatemala, and they were doing a Bible study. I'll never forget it because they knew that what they were discussing in light of the scripture, what could possibly mean that they would lose their life if they followed through on some of the actions they were deciding that they needed to choose to do. So it shaped me
mm.
in my life.
Can I ask a clarifying question about that? It doesn't have to be, too revealing, but you mean why were they meeting clandestinely because of political persecution, not necessarily religious persecution, or both?
Political, and well, in Guatemala, the Christian-based
Yeah.
communities were targeted, and any of the priests that were uh, encouraging cooperatives, and it was at that
Ah,
time.
okay.
Yeah, there was a lot of
Right.
yeah.
And the time period of was it a civil war or was it mostly just
There
a
was a
top
civil war.
down?
There was
Okay.
a civil war in Guatemala.
And just remind folks what the years in for that
Well,
war?
when I was there was in 1990, which was coming towards the end of it, but
Yeah.
it lasted for quite a few decades.
Well,
And
most
the
of the
peace,
80s.
yeah, and the peace accords were signed in 95, I think it was. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Yeah, interesting because Susan Tofelson, who's on the call, who works for the Cascabel Hermitage program. Jim Corbett was instrumental in the sanctuary movement that was trying to help many of those folks over the border in the
Mm,
80s. So kind of a
right.
cool connection. And so you would travel there, and you were working on that side of the border, then you would go to Guatemala.
Yeah, we went to Guatemala with a group called the Christian Task Force on Central America, and
Hmm.
we would do fact finding trips. So yeah,
Wow.
I learned that was a huge education for me, and
Yeah.
yeah.
And did you move on from your Baptist roots? Did you become Catholic or anything like that? Or you just
I didn't become Catholic, but I became involved in the United Church.
yeah.
Yeah, but and that was when I actually during those years was when I discovered silence. So
Hmm.
and my very first silent retreat. Yeah.
Oh wow, tell us about that.
Well, like I say, it was with this community of folks, the Christian Task Force, and quite a few attended silent retreats at the Sisters of Saint Anne property outside by Souk. I don't know how many on this call were aware of that. It was a place called Glenairlie, and there were silent retreats led by a Catholic priest and a sister Helene, who was a sister of Saint Anne and a friend of mine that was involved in the Latin American in Central America, she invited me to go to a silent retreat. And I was a good Baptist girl from my upbringing. I knew nothing about silence. I think in any kind of church service I was at, if you got 30 seconds of silence, you'd be doing pretty well. Uh, so I knew nothing about silence, but it was a very dark time in my life. And because I was a single mother with three kids, I didn't really, there was a lot of facing a lot of injustice in Central America, but I was quite lost. And I had this sense that I needed to go. I hadn't knew nothing about it, but it was almost like an appointment with God. And so I went to this 10 days, the first time I'd ever being in silence. And those of you who had been to Glenairlie, they had tiny little cabins, a bit like what we have at the Rivendell Hermitage, a little bit more. They didn't have any heat source, but so you had this tiny cabin and just nestled in nature. And I think I spent the first 5 days in anger and just confused. And it was after the fifth day when there was a real breakthrough for me because it was basically okay, if there's any presence, any divine spirit here, I give up, I surrender. I just have to hear something. It was a very, and then all of a sudden there was this other way of listening, other way of hearing that came to me, and it was a very profound retreat. And I haven't looked back after that. I do my own 10 days of silence every year, every January. And it feeds my life because it's
Hmm.
a way somehow of entering into that space of silence that a hermitage provides that gives another way of hearing and shaping my life. So
Yeah, as we were planning for this talk, right? We were punctuated by your 2026 10-day silent retreat, right?
mhm.
Yeah. So this has been a consistent practice for how many years?
Guess since 93.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's amazing. So in addition to silence, can you tell us a bit about elders or mentors along the way?
Yeah, I think one of them, the first one that comes to mind was a Catholic priest that I met in Bolivia. It was around the time that I was pulling away from being involved with the Baptist church there. His name was Oscar Hussein. Um, I think he was a well-known writer in Bolivia as well. But I think he was the first one that I got to know who really listened to me I think in many ways he was my first experience of a spiritual director. Not that he would have said that's what he was, but I think coming from an evangelical tradition where you're supposed to have the answers, there was blessed few people that would hold the space for somebody to help discover what they were experiencing. But he was just a really important person in my life that listened to me and really curious and yeah, attentive.
Mhm.
So he was one. And I think the other one would be Sister Lorraine Lamar from the Sisters of Saint Anne. I got to know her in Vancouver after, um, and she was instrumental. We were the ones that formed the listening post, but she was just a very important person in my life as well. Um, had worked a lot with the First Nations and actually had taught at the residential schools, but was on the vanguard of some of the reconciliation efforts and just a
Mhm.
beautiful spirit. She meant a lot to me. Yeah.
Mhm. Anyone else you want to talk about? Those are the main two you want to talk about?
I think those are the two. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to say anything about maybe, people that you didn't know personally, but maybe intellectual influences? Or was there a book or a spiritual work that maybe was formative for you?
I I don't know about the spiritual work. The one that comes to my mind is a man named George Lakey, because I did a lot of training with him. He's actually still alive. He's 88. He did social action training, facilitation training in social action and nonviolence, and from based out of Philadelphia.
Mm,
Um, and I did a lot of training with him, and he basically taught me emergent design, which
mm,
is and it's based a lot on the popular education style of where you trust the wisdom of the group, and which is instead of teaching, what you're doing is you hold the space for and listening for how the wisdom that's there, and I would say the movement of the spirit in a group.
mm.
He's written
Yeah.
quite a few books, but he
Is-
is instrumental in how we lead retreats. But
Yeah.
George Lakey,
Is he connected to the Quakers at all, or he just has
he
his
is
own
definitely
approach?
he's connected to the Quakers as well. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
okay. Yeah,
yeah,
Quakers are wonderful at that sort of thing.
mm,
Yeah.
yeah.
Right. All right.
I mean, if you're wanting mentors, the other one would be Joyce Rupp. We actually ended up Joyce Rupp.
Joyce Rupp, okay, the
Yeah,
poet and theologian.
she actually I invited her to come to Rivendell,
Yeah.
and she said she would, great, light, lovely invitation. She'd put it in her dream pocket. Then I got back to her a few years after that and I said, would you like to move it from your dream pocket and actually come to Rivendell?
Yeah.
And she came and I got to know her and we use a lot of her material in our
Yeah.
retreats. And she actually wrote her book on uh, I'm just going drawing a blank, compassion, I think. Some of that at Rivendell. So yeah.
I'm looking it up here. Boundless Compassion, is that it?
Boundless compassion. Yeah,
Yeah. So Joyce Rupp, Boundless Compassion.
yeah. So,
Okay,
so I
great.
could go on, but you
Yeah,
guys
of
are
course.
good. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, you get the idea. Well, we talked about when silence, right, came in to your life, but is there anything else you want to say about the role of silence in your formation before we talk about the listening post and then Rivendell?
I don't know what more. I mean, I think I'm talking to the choir here.
Yeah.
Most people here in this conversation know the value of silence. I think for me, in this world so full of distractions and that places that are protected and safe where you can do that deep listening. I think the biggest thing for me on that initial retreat that I did, I just remembered I had a sense that God was out there somewhere, and I remember that one pivotal day that halfway through when I surrendered, sort of hearing that all you have to do is listen to my that inner voice, and follow any of those promptings. Um, and and then I was given Isaiah 55, and that one, listen to me and pay attention, and so that your soul may live. And I realized when I read that, that that spirit of the divine spirit, or the spirit of God, or spirit of love, can speak to me as much as to Isaiah. It was a pivotal moment for me when I realized how important it was to me to follow that inner leading, and which is what we invite people to do when we hold a silent retreat. You know, it's most important that you trust that still small voice, and that's what's important. Yeah.
Mhm.
So I don't know what more you might want, but
Yeah.
that's, to me, I think
Oh,
that those experiences, those first 3 years of doing a retreat, a silent retreat each year, convinced me that that's what I wanted to do with my life, is to create that space. Feels like it's
yeah.
my mission in life, is to create space for people to encounter the divine. Yeah.
Wonderful. All right. Well, let's talk about the listening post. This is a major project of yours. So tell us about the origin and the purpose and how it's going.
Well, I started to work in the downtown Eastside at Carnegie Center, those who know Vancouver. Um, And it was there that the friend who'd originally invited me to the silent retreat, she says, Kathi, how can we offer this to this kind of space, like retreat experience, to folks from that community? And so I actually I took a course, an intensive course in spiritual direction in 96 in the summer. And when I came back that fall, we decided we would offer a silent retreat to people in the downtown east side. I think it's one of those things where fools rush in where angels fear to tread, because we offered a silent retreat at a campsite, and we had one-on-one spiritual accompaniment, which I was doing. We had a sweat lodge, and we had Vipassana meditation. We offered the three traditions, and it was amazing, amazing
Wow.
experiences. We did that,
Yeah.
a couple of those each year.
Yeah.
And then I began, it was during my training in California in Burlingame, when I heard about a Catholic priest who set up a listening post in the Tenderloin district in a SRO, single room occupancy hotel. And I kept thinking, because I had been working at Carnegie, that's what we need, is we need a space where people are not treated like clients. There's not services provided, but just a space where they could be heard and listened to. And in part because as a programmer at Carnegie, that was half of my job, was people would come and sit and want to just talk. So it took until it was till the year 2000, and that's after I met Sister Lorraine Lamar, who'd moved to Vancouver. And she had a similar dream that, why don't we try to create something like this? And at that point, the Bruce Erickson building, that was housing, opened up right at Main and Hastings. It's right on Main Street. And they had an empty space on the main floor. And so we asked to rent it. And we became a project of the Sisters of St. Anne. And it's been going for 25 years with just volunteers who hold the space. We do now have a part-time coordinator of it, but it's been there for 25 years, just a sacred, quiet space for people to come in,
Mm.
and and then we take folks from that community to Rivendell three times a year. We take them away
Hmm.
for retreats. So
Okay. And silence is a big part of that programming that, or is it's an unprogrammed space, or is it only open during programming?
it's the like a drop-in.
Hmm.
You mean the listening post?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's like a drop-in, but we don't offer coffee or food
Right.
or
Okay.
clothes.
Yeah.
They just come for the space. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Mm.
Okay. Very interesting. And I mean, how do you handle that in terms of the etiquette of the space? Is there a time limit, or people can stay as long as they like?
People can stay. They're open. It's open in the afternoon, so it's not the whole day.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there's a
Got it.
variety of people that come in.
Yeah. Yeah. Sounds amazing.
Mm.
All right. Well, let's talk about Rivendell then. How did it begin? I'm curious how the name, how it got the name, the story of the property, like tell us about the genesis of Rivendell.
Well, um, it was my parents, Howard and Shirley Bentall, and they had there had been wealth on the paper their whole lives, but the family company was sold towards the end of the 1990s, and so they had some extra money to actually what were they going to do with it, and they met through a mutual friend, a developer on Bowen Island called Wolfgang Dunes, and he had acquired this piece of property, which is on top of the hill that I'm sitting on right now, Kate's Hill, and zoned it for a retreat center. Now, he doesn't know much about retreats, which have given him a hard time over the years, but for some reason he zoned it that way. And mom and dad were really interested in this property, and they went to see it. And I actually went to see it as well. And I said, well, it's a great piece of property, but I wouldn't build a retreat center here because, I was used to Glenairley, which was tiny little cabins and in the woods and or right by the ocean where you have the four elements really close to you. And this is on top of a hill. But anyways, they did meet up with Wolfgang and decided that they wanted to do this. They wanted to create a retreat center. And the miraculous piece is that from the day they met and when the doors opened was only 18 months, um,
Hmm.
which is
Wow.
unheard of. Wolfgang donated the land, and mom and dad put the money towards the building. And my mom actually drew up the design for each of the floors. Um, Not that she was ever an architect, but she was a detail person. And so they followed that, and it was able to open the space. And when we wrote down our vision, mom wrote down her vision, and I wrote down mine. And of course, I said it needs to also have a place for Hermitage. Like that had been my experience for 7, 8 years
Yeah.
of retreat. And I'd also visited Nestucca, for example, in on the Oregon coast where they have Hermitage cabins as well. They had them. So I just said, but anyways, after we compared our visions, I decided that, well, actually, really, it is a retreat center, but in two different locations, that we would need
Mhm.
another location for a Hermitage
Yeah.
center. And so we proceeded with opening up Rivendell and had a visioning committee to try to figure out how could we hold this, how could we operate this in a way that was accessible to people. And this is where I think the spirit was so at work in all of this because I'd had the experience of offering retreats for the downtown Eastside. And the end result, of course, of that is that we were on a shoestring budget. You needed to have a place where you didn't have, couldn't, where you could bring your own food and that would be accessible financially. So I said, whatever we do, it has to be accessible financially and in other ways
Mm.
as well.
Yeah.
And and since we'd been operating the listening post with volunteers, I thought maybe we could have a volunteer community host it so that we didn't have to have the overhead of staff, and we could actually have an unstaffed kitchen where people brought their own food. And I'll just tell you, I don't know where we are. I don't want to go on too long, but um, one of the things that happened for me in the preparing before it opened was I went to my own silent retreat at this place called Nestucca, and Andy Duffner was the priest there. And one night I went into the house there, and on he had this article. I found this article that said, "I run in the dark." And in that was a blueprint of what you needed to do in order to offer retreat spaces in a radical way. And at that retreat center, you just put your payment according to what you could afford in a bird house. You just put it in there. That was how you paid. There was no invoices or anything. And so I just thought, maybe we could offer Rivendell this way,
Hmm.
just let people pay according to their means and not have the overhead of staff. And my mom and dad or my mom and Wolfgang went and argued with public health authorities for the permission to have a non-staffed kitchen, which we've been able to have all these years. So groups bring their own cooks and
Yeah.
individuals cook for themselves. And that's
Yeah.
how we ended up starting with this volunteer hosting community. Um,
Hmm. Okay, so the model is volunteer run and sliding scale. You donate to stay there, right?
mhm,
I
mhm.
mean, I've seen this in some startup nonprofit restaurant models. We had one in Salt Lake City, for example, and sometimes it's hard to get people to see the value in what you're providing. Is the model still working?
The model is still working. Yeah.
Wow,
I
that's
mean, you
good.
do, yeah. I mean, we
Yeah.
do have a staff person now. So, but we
Okay.
we we are in the black, so the model is still working. Yeah. I
Wonderful.
mean, I'm not saying it's easy. You have to have a whole bunch of you got to keep your
Yeah.
your volunteers and volunteer hosts and a few of them are on this screen right now in this group that host at Rivendell.
Oh, yes, wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I said this before we started, but I've been to Rivendell dozens of times. That was one of the first retreat places I ever went to when I moved to Vancouver in 2013. It was very central to my whole move into spiritual or contemplative spirituality, contemplative ecology, the power of silence, and so much discernment has happened there. I've been to the lodge a couple times, so yeah, people are unfamiliar. Right when you get off the ferry in Snug Cove, you go up Kate's Hill. There's a big barn-like, beautiful building at the top, and that's where a lot of group retreats happen. But you have to go farther down to the southern point of the island to get to the Hermitage. And it's like a central cabin with electricity and, very nice meditation space and a kitchen and rooms. But then there's five off-grid cabins around the Hermitage. And I spent when that opened, I mean, I would just go there, every couple of months,
Mhm.
especially in the dark, cold of the winter. And each of the off-grid cabins has a little hobbit stove, a wood stove, which the volunteers are very merciful in keeping the wood pile stacked. So it's just such a lovely arrangement situation. I've run my own retreats at the Hermitage, so you can book the whole Hermitage, and people come, and we've done contemplative ecology retreats. I did a Dark Night of the Soul retreat there once, and this last October, I brought 7 students from SFU there as part of
Mhm.
the ecological chaplaincy project that I'm piloting at SFU. And they absolutely loved it. Like, these are students that don't regularly go on retreat. They're mostly in environmental sciences, and they gelled as a group and they loved the space. So you've really brought something really beautiful into the world. So
Mhm.
yeah, thank you for that.
Oh, thanks for the description, Jason. That's
Yeah.
awesome. Yeah.
And how did they get the name Rivendell? Is this a Lord of the Rings
That was
reference?
Wolfgang and my mom. They're both Tolkien lovers.
Okay.
So I think it was Wolfgang that actually suggested it, and my mom was really happy.
Really?
This was prior to the movies, I just want to say. And if you see the
Okay.
movies, the Rivendell
Yeah.
is just so, I mean, it is beautiful, but it's it's quite something. But anyways,
Yeah.
in the movies, but yeah.
And is it true that there's also a pretty strong um, Celtic or neo-Celtic spirituality kind of spirit to the whole project as well, especially the libraries, for example, and the
The
liturgy?
Yeah, there's a strong Celtic component. I mean, the library that we have has been Margaret McAvity was a librarian. She's been so careful in terms of selection. They really support the contemplative
Hmm.
life, and we really do the Celtic. We have a big Celtic influence, and we some
Yeah.
Philip Newell's books, and yeah.
Has he ever been
resources
there?
from him. No, he has. I did invite him, but
Okay.
Joyce
Yeah.
Rupp responded, but
Good.
Neil has not yet. So,
Yeah. He's pretty busy
yeah,
for a
yeah,
contemplative.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah.
I'm hopefully going to go to Iona Island this summer, but not in a part of a program, but I'm excited to see and kind of compare feelings between Scotland and Bowen Island. So
Yeah, there's quite a, some people talk about Bowen being the Iona of the West. Don't know if I,
yeah,
yeah, yeah, so,
yeah. I
yeah.
mean, we do have an Iona Park in the Lower Mainland. Did you
Yeah.
know that?
No, I
That's a
didn't.
very interesting. It's a very interesting kind of long spit along the Fraser River just south of UBC in Pacific Spirit Park. It's called Iona, and so that's kind of an interesting overlap there. All right, you know what? Actually, what I'd love to do is actually open it up to folks if they have specific questions about Rivendell. Like we've kind of gone through part one of the conversation. The next questions are we move a little farther afield. So, does anyone have any specific questions about Rivendell or the listening post for Kathi? Just raise your hand. There's a function at the bottom, the react button. You can raise your hand digitally if you'd like.
Because I'm quite hot.
All right. It looks like the questions are still percolating, so I think we'll keep going. The next question, and we've covered a little bit of this, but tell me a bit about about the relationship between action and contemplation in your life. Maybe a bit more about how that works out today, these days for you.
I think for me, probably because of my experience with popular education or which is a big action, reflection action model. But for me, and also coming from an activist community around Central America, I experience so often that we are more reactive, and there's so much action that comes out of anger. Um, and that what is woefully lacking often is that chance to pause and find that third way.
Mm,
So, and I think in this world today, especially, I think always, but today especially, is just taking that time to think outside the box. And it means that we have to get out of our regular patterns in order to maybe discover another way to approach. And it often takes some courage and some deep listening, and to see my own self in it, because I need to see where I'm blind or where I'm just reacting, or it's from a wounded place, or it's from a place, yeah, that needs to be healed. Um, and then maybe I can hear of another way of coming at it, or I often think that the work of the spirit is about shifting my view, like it's expanding my view or helping me to see things from a different light. And I think that makes our action in the world, the more we can bring it with a contemplative eye, the more I think our action can be more effective. Um,
mm.
so I think yeah, it's very important to bring those two together.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you're working a lot more with the group dynamics, the side of action.
Mhm.
Is that right?
Well,
These
I
days?
have been in the past.
Yeah.
I do find it kind of interesting when leading silent retreats because it really is your own individual journey. So we're not doing a group action out of that, but supporting people as they are pondering their own life and what they're involved in. Um,
Mm,
but it doesn't end up with a very strong social justice component coming out of it. It has to be, it's more on an individual basis. But
mm.
yeah, I don't,
I I guess I would ask a question about contemplative ecology, and this relates to action. I know Bowen Island will certainly be vulnerable to some of the shifts towards a drier climate with climate change over the next few decades. I actually donated some Gary oak trees to the Hermitage, and last time I checked, they were doing okay. But say maybe a bit more about the land, the Rivendell, all the the campuses on Bowen Island and the land. How has that been a factor in running the Hermitage in general?
I think we've probably been more aware of that at the Hermitage because we've had a real problem on the island. We had, I don't know, about 5 or 6 uh, cedar trees that died. And I think the hemlocks are really suffering now too. There
And the
really is.
yew tree.
And the yew tree died. We had this
Yeah.
beautiful, beautiful yew tree. I don't know how many hundreds of years old. And it
Yeah.
died. I'm not, yeah,
That was very sad when I saw that the
very,
yew
very
tree
sad.
on the yew trail had died.
Yeah, yeah. So I think there's much more we could do to be stewards of that land. That's
Hmm.
the growing edge for us, I would
Yeah.
say. Yeah.
Well, the deer aren't helping.
Mm,
The Bowen is just overpopulated by deer. And, in order to recruit the next generation of trees, they got to get above the deer browse, and
mhm.
that's a challenge for sure.
Although we do have a cougar on the island right now that's doing its his or her
Yeah.
bit, feeding
Yes.
on the
Okay.
deer. Yeah.
And people aren't happy about this, right? The residents of
Oh,
Bowen.
I don't know. I think the cougar's kind of got a lot of friends, I think.
Oh, does he? Oh,
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
He or she? Yeah.
Yeah. I don't
I
think
I just
the
read it.
clans are not there. Yeah.
I think I was on a community web board somewhere that someone was just like, someone got to do something about this cougar. I don't want to be walking my dogs with a cougar around.
Well, we've coexisted quite well for the last year or so that the cougar's been there, and
Yeah,
no pets have disappeared, and yeah, so I think people are a bit more
good.
relaxed. Yeah.
No, good. That's good to know. All right. Well, I want to ask you about your writing. You're recently an author. You want to tell us a bit about your book project?
When I was young, my mom said I would never be a writer, so there we go. So, but
Take that, Mom.
no, Margaret McAvity and myself have led these retreats for, well, at Rivendell since 2002, but and we've got others that have joined and leading with us. And it is using this emergent design process in that we create the container of silence for folks that come. And it's usually a group of 12, 13 people. And so we talk about what it means to be in silence, how to be with each other. So we set it the first night, the tone for it, and people enter into silence that night. And we do some either long one of 3 days or else a long one over 8 days. And and then we each day people have the chance. It's all in silence. Meals are in silence. They use the space and enter into retreat, and follow their own leading. But then they have spiritual direction each day if they want it, and then we plan at noontime um, a gathering at 5 o'clock, a prayer time at 5 o'clock, according to the theme that's arising from the group. Um, when I did the training with George Lakey, he would give us the challenge as the next people to facilitate a session. What needs to happen with this group in order to move it forward? So in many ways, that's what we do in our retreats. Is okay. What is the thing that's coming up? What participatory kind of gathering can we do to have to pray together, to enter into a story together, whatever it is. And so that's called the emergent design, and we do that each day. And it's a very creative, dynamic kind of process. And so we finally decided, well, I think we better write this because we don't know anybody else who does retreats this way. It's not a themed retreat or a priest retreat. It's a participatory retreat. And so we wrote the book Wings of the Wild Bird, and it's called Designing Sacred Gatherings. And we talk about our process, and we talk about the elements that are needed when you hold these gatherings, and some of the resources that we use for it. So
Hmm.
yeah, it's
You,
available either through
do
me,
you
or
have it
it
there?
can be available through, I think that Margaret's still through Amazon, but
Okay.
yeah.
Do
Mhm.
you have a copy of it there you can show
I
us?
do, I do. It's
Yeah,
right
here
here.
we go. So, Wings of the Wild Bird, Designing Sacred Gatherings.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds like a real amazing. And Joyce wrote your forward?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mind you, in the forward, she does admit that she would never lead a retreat this way. It would be too scary for her, but
Okay.
and I think that's very true. She's quite
Yeah.
she's a speaker. She organizes her thoughts, but yeah.
Yeah, because people like to hear her speak. Yeah.
And again, there's a few people on this gathering that Jan has done it with us, and I think
Okay.
Sharon might still be here.
Mm,
Melissa, I think I saw them. They
yeah.
also lead the retreats this way. So
All
yeah.
right. Well, yeah, we can circle back to see if they have anything to add in a little bit. I just got a couple more questions. I'd love to have you respond to the theme of our webinar series, right? The theme is Hermitage as spiritual practice. So, we're trying to move into this conversation about what it looks like to hermitage, right? To use that as an action, as a verb, a bit like pilgrimage, right? You go on pilgrimage, and there's lots of ways to make walking sacred. And so, not that I'm discouraging anyone from going to Rivendell, but you don't need the hermitage to enjoy the benefits of silence. I'm just curious if maybe you had some thoughts on this idea of hermitage as spiritual practice.
Well, I haven't. It's just these webinar series made is making me think about that. Like not a place of hermitage, but hermitage is spiritual practice. So I don't have really well-formed thoughts except that it's cultivating that in one's own life, those times of listening, however one can do it, and those times of solitude, which again I think are so important, especially this day and age when we've got devices in our hands and where constantly that energy is coming at us, that it's very important to find it as a spiritual practice, finding
Mm,
times of the solitude. Um,
yeah.
I mean, I just even talked to my son and my granddaughter the other day who've just like they've taken the social media off their phones. And he says, I'm
Mm,
feeling so much better at night because I'm just not inundated. And
yeah.
so I think it's essential right now that we have
Yeah.
this spiritual practice of hermitage. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and some of the writing, the more non-dual thinkers, right? They talk about, the danger that that sometimes arises from this idea of mysticism as union with the divine, right? Is that there's this presupposition that you're somehow separate from the divine. And, to cultivate a spiritual practice, an intentional spiritual practice where you have this, carved out space or time, is that the human psyche can very easily compartmentalize. Like,
Mhm.
well, I'm a spiritual persona at this time of day, and I sit and I meditate, and then I go back to my job or I go back to my everyday life. And we in some cases, like we tend to move between this is a spiritual time and this is a non-spiritual time, right? Ordinary time and consecrated time, sacred space, profane space. And I would say that maybe there's the same danger around the culture of retreat and refuge, the sanctuary. Not that I have anything, you know, I need Rivendell. I love it and it's a place of recharge. But if it's the only space that we give ourselves permission to fully listen, to fully open, right? Then I think there's the risk, that when I get on the ferry and it lands on the North Shore, my defensive driving instincts are going to kick in, and I'm driving home, and by the time I get home, I'm already tightened back up, right? And in this world of busy, busy. So yeah, I think that is a
Mhm.
key invitation from especially from contemplatives like yourself who've done so well at navigating between worlds of action and worlds of contemplation, participatory retreats, that hermitage is not just a block on the calendar that we block off and defer growth to that space and time, but that we invite in every moment into our lives.
Hmm. Yeah, I think
Yeah,
it's very important.
good. So do you have any advice for folks who would maybe like to do better at that, like the everyday, the every kind of moment practice of hermitage?
Well, I'm not supposed to give a lot of advice, but one of the things we do say at, when we close a retreat, is to invite people to find those times, even just like driving in the car and deciding not to turn on the radio or listen to music, like you just to to create that space in your own home where you can go, do that deep listening. It's just
Hmm.
and all of that said, I think we need it integrated into our life. At the same time, I know for me, I live on my own. This little place that I have is very small. It's almost like a hermitage cabin itself. It's not a very big home I have on Bowen, but I do find more fruit comes from going away, because I actually, probably why we haven't connected, Jason, is that I use the Hermitage on Bowen for my own retreats. I don't
Hmm.
host there. So like, and I do need that protected time, but we need to integrate. It needs to be going back and forth, and yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
great. All right, so in a way, this is an invitation to everyone to book a retreat at Rivendell, but not to wait till you get there to start practicing. Right? Good. Well, Kathy, do you have any questions for me before we open it up to the group in the spirit of participatory conversation?
Not right at the moment, but
Okay. All right. Well, let's open it up. Did anyone have any questions for Kathy? Any comments, ideas about Hermitage as spiritual practice? George Wall, go ahead.
Thank you, Kathy. I really appreciate hearing your story about Rivendell. My question is about the experience of the natural world, and what do you feel about the natural world and the spiritual practice, and how important is it?
Oh, I think it's essential. Like for myself, but also in our retreats, we really encourage people to be out in nature. I've always said that nature is not confused about who they are. An alder tree is an alder tree. Rose bush is a rose bush. It's we as human beings that try to be somebody other than who we are. We're the ones that get confused. So that and I find in the silent retreats, nature and creation just speaks volumes to folks. And yeah, and we are often doing our beginning of our gatherings is like what's a gratitude moment for something that you experienced, and we encourage people to be out. And my own retreats, I can wander in the forest for several hours and just really absorb and listen, and yeah, so it's an essential part of the incarnation is in the created world. Yeah.
I got the impression from Charles he felt the same way. He would spend
Mhm.
the entire day fishing on the river and just watching the flow and knowing each bend. So yeah, he definitely spoke of it in the same light. Thank you.
Thanks, George. Anyone else want to chime in?
Well, I wonder if Jan or Sharon want to say anything more, because they both, um,
Yeah,
not to
especially
put them
about
on the
your,
stop, but Catherine as well has been involved in the retreats.
yeah, definitely invite you to step forward, unmute, and let us hear your experience, especially around this method of participatory retreats that Joyce wrote the forward for, but would refuse to participate in. All right, well, we'll let that sit for a minute because Susan has a question. Go ahead, Susan. Got to unmute though.
Okay, let me know if it's too loud because I have my earphones on.
No, it's great.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you so much for sharing your life and your journey and uh, the whole contemplative and reflective growth that happened through your activism and all of that. So my question specifically is, if you could speak a little more to the basis for your belief in your setting up the donation-based retreats. And the reason I ask is with our Hermitage program with the Cascabel Conservation Association, it's been totally donation-based for over 30 years. And it comes not so much to keep finances, dealing with finances as it is people's own value for the time that this silence has given them. And so I admire that you've been doing it that long also. And so I think I want to hear a little bit more about the value you feel as a contemplative and an activist, the value you feel that that helps people who would normally either not be able to afford the cost of doing retreats in most places, but the value of having people, the beginnings of attempting to be in silence in the natural world, in a hermitage with themselves, and however they name God. So I know it's kind of a long question. I'm not very good at being that articulate, but if you could speak a little more to the history and your feelings around the value, the larger picture of donation-based retreats.
Yeah, I mean, I was very clear on this at the beginning because of being involved with the both with the poverty and the the limitations of people in say in Guatemala, but also with the downtown east side where I felt people don't really feel they're welcome. And then when they've got no resources financially, they just, they would just not feel like it was a place for them. So I knew that that barrier needed to be taken away. I mean, when we have some other retreat places in BC that it's very expensive to go, and I'm just so aware that it's just so for the people that can afford and they could afford to go anywhere. So to me, it was a radical, a radical welcome, and at the end result, it seems to me like even then, because people know they can come and pay what they can afford, even then, because it requires you to come to the island and you bring your own groceries and that sort of thing, it limits too who can actually do that if you don't have the resources or or you live say in the downtown east side within the 8 square blocks, because some people do that but they will come with the group, which makes a difference. But I think there's something about we're called to be radical in our welcome. And the other thing that it behooves those that can afford to pay more. But it's going to be on their conscience if they don't. If they think, oh, I only have to, I can just give $20 or whatever. So we've had that conversation quite a bit. Like, what about those who can pay more? And I think, well, it's on their conscience, because I think I'd rather err on the side of making it accessible to folks. But I'm not sure if that answered what you were wondering, Susan, but to me, it's really important. And I've been thrilled that it's actually worked and that we've been able to keep the place open. We survived COVID, and it's yeah, it's been a real heartwarming policy. So
You very much answered it, and I love the word radical, because then and even now it's extremely radical, but radical is a huge open armed welcome. So thank you so much for your vision.
okay, thanks, Susan.
All right, maybe one or two more, if there's anyone who'd like to ask a question or share an experience. Robert McDonald, go ahead.
Yeah, Kathi, I've been to both the Hermitage and the main retreat center a number of times, and I know some folks in common that I did have a conversation 10 years ago with you, so I know a little bit about how Rivendell is structured. I'm curious, especially at the lodge, what does an average month look like? Like, are you taking in retreats from other people that where you know the retreat leader, or are you running your own retreats? I'm just curious as to what the mix is. Um, and maybe actually now I understand an experience I had 10 years ago when I first time there. There was I was doing a personal retreat, and I'd been there for 3 or 4 days. And in the last day, there was a main program going on, and I was just floating around with my own personal retreat. There was a main retreat going on, and it ended. And it sounds like it was one of yours, because I talked to the fellow out on the sun deck afterwards, and he said, "I've never been to a place like this. I live in the downtown East Side." His experience of the lodge at Rivendell is, which, for those who haven't been there, it's set up like a four-star hotel would be my opinion. I mean, it's a beautiful place, and it's well finished, and it's just beautiful. So I was curious about his reaction. He said, "It just I have no words for a place like this. It just wasn't part of his reality, and yet he'd had a number of days at this retreat center doing presumably your program." And that really made an impact on me, because it's a 10-year-old conversation now. And I thought, yeah, that's the way it should be, where it's funny, I'm tearing up over it. The economic barriers aren't there. So it opened up to this individual something that he'd never experienced before. And I suspect for somebody like that, you know, a week of the Hermitage would just, whoa, that's just too far out there. To spend a total time in silence completely on your own, because the Hermitage is pretty silent. So anyway, just curious as to what your mix is. I mean, at the main lodge, because it strikes me, there was a quote, I think, at one of the earlier sessions about Thomas Merton saying, perhaps it was to Father Charles, that we can make you a good member of the monastery if you come to Gethsemane, but if you want to be a hermit, you'll have to go off and do it on your own. The monastery is too busy. And to some extent, I can see that dichotomy between the main lodge and the Hermitage. Anyway, I'm just curious as to what your normal mix of programs is, and how do you handle people doing silent retreats, and if you got 20 people doing a silent retreat, it's a busy place even then.
Okay, we did a revisioning in the year 2020, and out of that, we brought in our own programming. Before that, I used Rivendell as a space and had a team of people and offered retreats, but I organized them on my own. But after that revisioning, we now, and you can see it on the website, we offer our own retreats throughout the year. And what we try to, and Sharon could even maybe speak more to this because she helps with the bookings, but we try to do a third, a third, a third. So a third of the time of the year is for our own retreats, and a third is for other groups that use Rivendell. And we need them to, it helps with our finances as well, a lot of them, although we are focusing more on some of the nonprofit groups to use Rivendell, and then a third of individuals' time. So we have blocks of time throughout the year at the lodge for individuals to come on retreat. And it is amazing. We have 17 rooms, but it's amazing. You can have 17 people there plus the hosts, and it doesn't feel busy at all. And a silent retreat, you can have a silent retreat of that many people, 17, 18, we're usually there in the building, and it's quiet. So that's how we divide it up, a third, a third, a third. And then the Hermitage, as you said, is for solitude and silence. And although small groups can use it, in as Jason talked about, and we are starting to offer 4 retreats there a year to introduce people to that site. So, yeah. Does that answer your question, I think, Robert? Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, it does. Thank you very much. Because when you're on a silent retreat, I guess it's my linear mind that won't stop. But I keep wondering, how does this place work just on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah.
Because it's a complicated place. But how does it work? And yet you're in silence, so you can't ask any questions. So, thank you
All
for
right.
your answer.
All right. Sharon, did I see your hand go up, or is that not true?
Well, because there was a gap, I thought I'd add in some reflections, but I see that there is a hand up. So it wasn't anything important. Kathy's spoken really well to well, maybe what I'll just say, just really quickly, one of the things I was thinking about is how you talked earlier about hermitage as a practice and how just that's so essential in our world today. And I think people are really thirsting for that kind of spaciousness
Yeah.
in their own lives, and you can just get caught up in the swirl of everything. Um, and one of the privileges we have in the guided retreats is to offer accompaniment. And I think it makes a real difference. And, we're not doing therapy, but those of us who are involved in the leadership of retreats, we are able to spend time with people in silence. So the bulk of the day they're in silence, and they have up to an hour with one of the leaders, just to be witnessed, really, because things start to surface, and that can be really powerful,
Mhm.
and can help people then as they journey through those days of silence to have that opportunity to reflect, and I think that is what really helps ground it as a practice. That this is something that I need in my life. And so whether you can come on retreat every few months, or whether you just find a way in your own lives to carve out that time to tend to the inner work, tend to that voice within. But I think that there's something about the accompaniment we're able to offer that seems to help people kind of move into that in a deeper way. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Practice makes perfect, right? Like that's what retreats often are for. It's like, this is what I need to listen for. This is what it feels like to deeply listen. This is what silence and stillness and downtime feels like. Okay. Now I bring that into my life.
Yeah.
Do you remember introducing me to Rivendell Hermitage?
I do, Jason. I was thinking about that.
So,
We met when you were living at the place near St. Margaret's, and
yeah,
yeah.
2014 or 15 or
Yeah.
something. Yeah.
No,
It was
I
before I moved to Hineni House, actually. I think that we,
oh, okay, yeah.
yeah,
I
anyway.
just remember bringing you there because I thought I
Yeah.
think Jason would like this place. So
Yeah, my eyes were just like, what? I was so excited. Rudy, go ahead. Rudy, are you there?
Kathi, is there
Great.
anything you can say about the, the the work that you're doing, intersecting with reconciliation work, with contact with First Nations people, with Indigenous spirituality? Is there anything around that that you can say?
Uh, I wish I was doing more. I would say that, but there has been some movement of wanting to work a little bit more with the Squamish Nation around retreat possibilities, but it's just beginning. And certainly at the listening post, we have a lot of First Nations folks, and some of whom come to the retreats, and we've got medicine wheel up on the top of Kate's Hill alongside of our cross. We used to do more with the listening post in terms of the retreat where we could offer a sweat lodge at the same time, but we're not doing that now because the location doesn't work for a sweat lodge. So yeah, there's more that could be done for sure, but yeah, it's a growing edge.
All right, growing edges are good. And that seems like it might be a good place to leave off and let people back to their nights. I definitely appreciate the gift of your evening to spend with us here. I'll remind you that actually our next installment of the webinar series will actually be a month from today, because Robert Rodriguez, who was going to give us a talk on the history of Hermitage, he wrote the book, literally the Book of Hermits, is having some medical issues arise, so he's postponed. So stay tuned on rescheduling that. So as far as it goes now, our next scheduled event will be on March 26th, so a month from tonight. It'll also be a Thursday. And Susan Tollefson will be with us, and a panel from the Cascabel Hermitage Association, or the Cascabel Conservation Association Hermitage Program, which is based out of Cascabel, Arizona, near, well, due east, I guess, of Tucson. And I would definitely encourage you to tune in for that and help us spread the word. If you're interested in getting involved with the Hermitage Society, the Charles Brandt Hermitage, send me an email or join our mailing list, charlesbrandt.ca. And if you'd like to do a retreat at Rivendell, it's very easy to set up. So have a look at their website. All right, so thanks everyone for joining us this evening. And I encourage you to think more about how Hermitage might be a spiritual practice for you.